Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Steckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and the Eating at a Meeting livecast for the podcast, which is where you are right now. In the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group and on the podcast, I talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage because I think it's really important for all of us to understand food and beverage, from farming and soil to meditation and doctors and dietary restrictions, everything and everything in between. It's the one thing that we share. It's our common ground. No matter where we are in the world, we all have to eat. But I was actually listening to a podcast last week that's saying we shouldn't actually think of food as a right, but it's actually a privilege for some. And that's a whole nother topic that we'll bring up in another conversation because I'm going to try to get that chef on the show as well. But today I am so excited to have my my sister from the La Dames d'Escoffier on the show. She is the Chief Chocolate Officer, which I'm sure a lot of you would love to have that title. Chief Chocolate Officer at Food at Heart and Calm Cocoa by Meredith Whiteley. So Meredith is on the show, and she is actually a meditation teacher and mindful eating guide. I think we all need that, with a passion for cacao in all of its forms. She supports individuals in everyday stress management using chocolate as one of her main tools to help people slow down, connect with their senses, and with issues around sustainable living. And I love all of that. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's amazing to be here.
I'm so happy to connect with you. And, our mutual friend Fiona from Scotland is actually how I found you through the DOM system. So I'm so glad that we connected. And so I'm going to jump right in here with this. I mean, we're in stressful times. I mean, not just from COVID, but it's now the holiday season and everybody's telling us to stay home. We can't travel. And this is the time for treats. So, which a lot of them contain chocolate. But let's talk about mindful eating and stress. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, I think mindful eating is really interesting because as you so beautifully described in your introduction, thank you for that. That was a really lovely overview of what I do. We can find it very difficult, just even in normal times, and we are not in normal times, to slow down and to connect. And that's really where something like mindful eating comes into play, because mindful eating is really about connecting with all of your senses. And that's what we do when we taste and when we eat. I think most of us, and this was certainly me before I trained in meditation, kind of thought of eating as just this thing where I loved it. Clearly, I love food. You put something in your mouth, you chew it, you chomp it, and you digest it, and that's kind of eating. But it's so much more than that. And the reason I particularly love mindful eating is that it's about a sense of connection with yourself and your body, but also the wider connection with the food system, with the people that grow the food, with all the ways that they get to us. And I think particularly after lockdown and during lockdown, I think people have started to appreciate even just some of our food systems a little differently, because people suddenly couldn't buy things that we were used to being able to buy. So it has these two aspects of it. One, which is very much connected to slowing down, appreciating food, stress management, a form of meditation, and then that wider sense of connection. And both of those really appeal to me.
So slowing down, and I was listening to you on another podcast, but my professor, the founder of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, talked about chewing and that we should count our chews, or we should chew our food until it's very, very tiny and easily digestible. Is that what you're telling us to do, or are you just telling us to pay attention to what we
exactly? So yes and no is kind of the answer. I mean, I've heard many times the whole thing that you should chew something 20 times before you eat it. I mean, it depends on the food, to be honest. Something that, like a carrot, for example, that's really hard, there's a lot to it. To really break it down, that kind of makes sense. Something like chocolate, I mean, it's generally not about chewing anyway. It's more about letting it melt and sucking it and letting it to kind of go down your throat. So the chewing is, I guess, another way to slow down. And I think because for me, mean, chocolate was, I guess, without me realizing, one of my first introductions into mindful eating without even knowing it at that point. But because I came into a lot of this and came into my regular meditation practice as a way to manage my digestive issues, and really, even though I wasn't a particularly fast eater, one of the things that was never said to me, which is really important for your digestion, especially if you have issues, is to slow down, eat really slowly, tune into the signals, tune into the food, really start to recognize how it's making you feel. But I think also, and this is particularly relevant for anyone who has dietary issues, is that it can be really stressful eating. And so actually bringing meditation and mindfulness and mindful eating into it, for me, helped me just take some of that stress that I had around eating. So it's this wonderful practice. And, I'd love to say I came up with it. I did not. I mean, it's a very, very ancient Buddhist practice. And even Zen monks now, this is part of their daily practice. Meditation is very much about a mix of formal and informal practices. And they, as a group, will sit and eat their meals in silence together and really reflect on the food and enjoy it. And I think a lot of us have lost that. And certainly I'd include myself in that as well. I mean, I grew up as Catholic, and we sat around the table as a family. We said grace before our meal. So there was always that bit of just stopping, pausing, reflection. And, I'm definitely the person that, especially when I was working in an office, I would sit at the desk with my sandwich, doing my emails, looking at my phone, and all of this was going on. And I just didn't connect that at all with digestive issues. And I didn't really connect that with my mental health. It was these two sort of separate things, that nutrition sat here, physical health sat here, and I didn't really link it into the whole mental health and well-being side of things.
That makes complete sense, because it is like, I just shoved a protein bar down, so I got it in before we chatted. And that was definitely not mindful eating, and thinking about how that's being nutritious for me. And I mean, it's giving me the protein that I'm needing, but I'm not actually sitting down and enjoying that. I'm on the run. And I think for a long time, society has trained us to eat fast and on the go. And if you're moms, or you're an event planner, with tons of people that I work with are event planners, and we are getting those meals on the go, or we're pushing our attendees through events, okay, go eat your food now. And then let's go back and educate, right? So it's a completely different mindset. And
it is. And don't get me wrong, I don't sit and eat every single mouthful in complete and utter mindfulness. That's not practical. And I'll be really honest, in normal times, when I'm running events, I also don't sit and eat my lunch very mindfully. I'll have a little bit of food, and I quite often won't eat. So, again, these things are not about being perfect. It's about finding ways, working them in, little or large. And sometimes it might be a whole meal. Sometimes it might be, if you're an event planner, if you've got 5 minutes, and this is not always possible, I do appreciate it, but even if you've got 1 minute to sit with a cup of tea or a coffee, when you've got a little bit of a break, when everyone's doing activities, and you've got that little bit of time, even just the sitting, being with the senses of having that cup of tea for 1 minute is something that you can do. But as I say, absolutely, this is not about perfection. And I think this was one of the things that I didn't also realize about meditation. I thought there were perfect ways to do this, and there are not. There are perfectly imperfect ways to make it fit into your life. And that's sort of how I approach it now. And I think it took me a few years to get to that point. I'm not saying I arrived there straight away. There was lots of kind of breaking down some of my own internal, biases and behaviors to get to that point. And I guess being self-employed, I now have a bit more flexibility as well. When I worked in an office, I didn't necessarily have that flexibility of time. But as I say, even now, I mean, we were talking just before, I'm in my really, really busy period for work. I run remote events as well as making my hot chocolate range. I'm really busy. I had probably 10 minutes for my lunch yesterday, and I could eat half a sandwich. And so I just did that. And so that's okay as well.
Well, yeah, and it's a balancing act, and I am not one to sit still and meditate and hold my hands and I'm not that way. My meditation in some sort is actually going on a walk, right, or just getting up and doing something, because I don't put headphones on. I want to hear the birds chirping and things like that. So, but that's not really about eating. So one of the things, when I ask you, I mean, you got into this for digestive issues, and I told you, just before the show and in an email that, I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. Yes, everybody, it's a thing. But way back after
that was my issue too.
yeah. And it was in college, and we're right after college in 30 years ago. But the doctor's like, okay, don't eat apples, don't drink caffeine, and stay away from orange juice, because, that was all I was told. But you have taken that to a whole new level. And I'm like, in 30 years, I'm hoping that we got to a new place than just that. But can you explain to us how you, well, first of all, how you evolved into that, and then where does chocolate come into play?
Oh, well, just chocolate comes into everything. No, there is a reason, and I will explain the chocolate connection. And it's really interesting because I also have issues with irritable bowel syndrome, and I think the whole process of even getting a diagnosis is very stressful, and there's still not a huge amount of understanding sometimes with general practitioners. Some are great, some aren't. It's a very, very hit and miss. Fortunately, I've got slightly better advice than, just don't have apples. I mean, we know a little bit more about FODMAPs now, which was what the connection was with apples. But it was really interesting because I'd kind of known for a long time I had issues, and I thought it was very much dietary related. And so I went through the whole process of excluding foods, following FODMAP, doing this, doing that. And what I hadn't realized was, and it was never really clearly explained to me, it was a little bit through self-research and then really, really pushing my doctor, because I had so many appointments trying to work out, because it was really quite debilitating. I think that was the other thing I didn't understand. It's not just this little upset stomach, unpleasant thing. I mean, for me, it was actually wiping me out. So it was almost like chronic fatigue. And for a period of 12 months to 2 years, that got really, really horrendous. And I hid it very well. Only my poor husband really knew. My husband and my mum kind of knew what was going on. So I finally did get a diagnosis. It was dealt with in quite a medical way, a bit of just a sort of nutritionalism way of taking a few things out of your diet. And then when I finally pushed, I was given access to some cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was this real starting to unravel the fact that I was looking, I mean, I already ate very well. I ate very well. I cooked my food. I was being careful with the kind of ingredients I was using. But one of the things that I wasn't really doing, I was looking after my nutritional and physical health, but not my mental health in quite the same way. And I just hadn't really understood the stress and gut connection. And it's been really interesting. I think in the last 5 years, particularly, there's been huge progress in our understanding and even the sexiness of it as a topic. Like I'm comfortable talking about IBS now. When I was first diagnosed, I didn't want to talk to people about my dietary habits and my stomach. And it was really, I felt quite embarrassed by it. And coming through all of that and understanding it's just part of my body and my early warning system, I was like, okay, this is just something I need to deal with. It's part of who I am. And this really lovely overlap of starting to really look at my mental health in a way that was not just, doing Tai Chi once a week or kind of looking after myself. And I knew meditation was supposed to be good for me because I'd read about it a lot. So I'll just give it a go. And I went to a day retreat. It was a day retreat for mindfulness, which I didn't realize was a silent retreat till I got there, which my husband thinks is hilarious. I'm not known for being that silent. But the lunch was a mindful eating practice. And it was about an hour and a quarter. And it's the first time I'd done this. And they explained the process of, they'd laid all this beautiful food out with these textures and colors and, sitting just in silence with your plate, taking a few things, touching your food, smelling your food, chewing really slowly and exploring the breakdown in your mouth. I was thinking, wow, I love food. And I've not just sat and tasted. And I had this pepper or capsicum and, bit into it. And there was this burst of sweetness and then the crunch and then the water and then the bitterness of the outside of the skin. It was like, wow, this was a total revelation. And the amazing thing was that I'd been getting more and more. My last, what I'd call like proper job, as in being employed by someone else, was working for eBay. And while I'd been working at eBay, I mean, I'd loved chocolate for a long time, but I'd been getting more and more involved in the world of chocolate. I'd been meeting lots of people in the craft chocolate world. I was going to chocolate events and cooking classes and tastings and tours and all sorts of things like that. So it was absolutely my passion on the side. And doing this process, I was like, okay, actually the way you taste chocolate properly it's almost exactly the same as mindful eating. So there was just this really lovely overlap with the two things that made me feel really good, really supported my mental health, all came together. And it was also, and I'm sure if there's anyone who's listening here who works with and in around chocolate, it's a notoriously difficult ingredient to work with. I mean, like it's very tricky, especially working in a home kitchen. I work out of my home kitchen, so I don't have climate control. So actually, you have to be very, very focused with it. And so part of my informal practice is not just the tasting of the chocolate and sharing that with people. It's my work with chocolate, because I have to be focused and stuff goes wrong. A bad day in the kitchen compared to bad things that have happened in my work before is not so bad. You have an issue with chocolate, you can normally sort it out, especially with a bit of experience, you know what to do. But it absolutely, my work is now part of my practice, and it helps me be focused and it helps me be relaxed. Not all the time. If you'd asked me this last week at 8 o'clock in the evening when I was in the kitchen, not always, I'm going to be honest. But, it's this really beautiful ingredient full of flavors with this amazing sacred roots as well, which I think all becomes part of it. And so for me, it's just, I think I probably know about 15% about chocolate in comparison to some of the real experts, but I just love the fact that there's so much more to learn. There's so much more to taste. You never get to a final place with really understanding chocolate because someone's doing something amazing and different. And I think that's why it's such a beautiful ingredient to work with, but why it's so beautiful to taste as well.
Okay, so that brings me to the aisle at the grocery store. There's 60, 70, 80, there's 30, there's milk chocolate, there is so much, there's white chocolate, there's so much to try, and then there's ones with almonds and salt and all that. And I actually went in Brussels. I went to the World Chocolate Factory or Museum, and with like 35 different chocolates to taste right there. But so do you like buy your chocolate, or are you getting cacao beans and making your chocolate and all of, what are you doing with what you in your practice in making chocolate?
Yeah, I don't quite have the skills to make chocolate, I'll be honest. People ask me that quite often. I mean, it's an absolute science and art, and it's so hard to make really good chocolate. And so I leave that bit to the experts. I buy my chocolate in 2-kilo bags from a beautiful chocolate maker in Suffolk on the east coast of England. And they're a wonderful company who work directly with the cacao plantations. And so they're sourcing their beans in a really ethical and sustainable way where they pay people properly. But that in and of itself is a whole process. And I'm in huge admiration of anyone that's involved in that, because it's really tricky to get the consistency. And then it comes to taste. I mean, I could tell you what I like, and there are certain things that you can appreciate in chocolate. And I guess one tip, if you're looking for a chocolate to choose, if you're thinking of, I guess, a more ethical, sustainable chocolate, the less ingredients in the chocolate itself, the better. But then it comes down to your taste. So there are really fantastic white chocolates and milk chocolates and dark chocolates. I eat all colors of chocolate. I mostly eat dark chocolate because that's the one with all the flavors. It's also the one with a lot of the stimulants as well. So, you can, if I have too much late at night, I'll be like, ding, 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 ding. But, it can be difficult to start with. And so my suggestion always just taste a few different chocolates. Find out what you like, and to start to explore, maybe even an origin is a place to start. So look for chocolate from Madagascar, for example, because Madagascan chocolate will either tend to be, if it's a single origin chocolate, so it means it comes from a particular country, tends to be quite citrusy or quite red berries, and it's quite easy to taste as a darker chocolate. Some dark chocolates can be a bit more challenging, and you might need to almost build your palate up to those. I mean, I'm quite happy to eat all the way up to 100% cocoa chocolate with no sugar added, but some of them are disgusting. So again, I know what I like, and I've just tried a few different brands, and price will be a little bit of an indicator. But again, I've had very expensive chocolates that I didn't like, and it's not that they were bad chocolate, they just didn't suit my palate. So just try, it's experiment, try. As I say, probably one of my tips would be look at the back of the packet. If it's got a little bit of a story about the growers or about the chocolate maker, that's normally a good sign. And if it's not got too many ingredients in the chocolate, that's a good sign too. But then it also comes down to pleasure. So I would never say, look, I mean, most people in the UK, and I grew up in Australia, we grew up with dairy milk, and that was the chocolate that I loved. And so part of eating well is eating for pleasure, and memory and taste is connected to all of these things. So look, I'm partial to a Snickers every now and then, so I'm not going to say don't eat that. I predominantly eat better chocolate because I've got used to tasting that, and I have access to amazing stuff because I always have about 20 kilos of chocolate at home. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm in a slightly different position, but I just going to the supermarket aisles. I used to Green and Blacks was probably my first introduction into something a little bit better, and then I just started tasting around and talking to people, having a look at a few chocolate sites, going to chocolate shows, and then just starting to understand a bit more about the ethics. And for me, because the ethics of food production and sustainability is really important, I started to really start to look into that a little bit more. But start where you are. That's always where I say, start where you are. Every now and then you treat yourself to something a little better, or a beautiful set of truffles from a chocolatier locally. Again, that's a beautiful thing to do.
That's so fun and different. And it's like tasting wine or different spirits and tasting the different chocolates, and I think there was a seminar for MPI did a couple of years ago, and when we were in Poland, it was champagne and chocolate tasting and matching those. So that would be kind of fun. Now, are there, getting to your practice and helping people be more mindful with their eating and just in general, are there steps that we should take in that mindful eating practice? And where does, just for everybody else to know, where does the chocolate come into that as well?
Yeah, there are steps. And it's interesting that you said earlier about the fact that you're not a kind of person that likes to sit down, close your eyes and which is a lot of people, by the way. And so walking meditation is something that people do. But one of the reasons that I use chocolate is that sometimes when you've got something external to focus on, it can help with that distraction. But also, just to say as a slight aside, a wandering, distracted mind is all part of meditation as well. I have some days where I sit down and I'm totally calm and focused, and other days my mind is off all over the place, and that's fine. But that's part of the reason why I use chocolate with people, because you've got something else to focus on, and it acts as what's called a cognitive disruptor. So it can get in the way of that thinking. And sometimes when you're really in your head, one of the best things you can do is get out of your mind and into your body, whether that's through eating, drinking, walking, other forms of meditation like the one you do at end of yoga called the body scan or yoga nidra, all kind of act in this way. But if you're coming into the mindful eating practice for the first time and you've never done it before, you can listen to guided practices if you want to, but you can self-guide yourself quite easily. First of all, it's a case of finding somewhere that you can sit where you're not going to be too disturbed. It doesn't need to be totally silent and quiet, because, we're in normal life and that life just happens around us, but somewhere where you feel quite relaxed. I should just say, I've run mindful eating meditations in all sorts of places, massive food fairs in the centre of London with a DJ behind us, at Christmas fairs in London with a whole hall of people walking around shopping. And it's amazing, actually, with that little bit of focus, you can become quite present. So again, you don't need to be totally silent, but somewhere you feel quite relaxed. And then it's just a case of working through each of your senses. And so if I'm doing it with chocolate, I'll normally have one or two different types of chocolate, just having it in front of me and starting by just taking a few breaths just to settle yourself, then starting to look at the chocolate, because that's one of the things we forget to do with our food. We quite often forget to look and just shovel the first mouthful in. But actually, our eyes are a really important part of our taste. We do eat with our eyes, and even the color of food can affect the taste. So just starting by looking at your food and then working through each of the senses. You might like to touch the chocolate, so either stroking the surface or picking it up. Try not to lick your fingers, because it does melt at that point. But even like rubbing your fingers together. And then if you've got a piece of chocolate that's not soft and smushy, which sometimes milk and white chocolate is, I would like take it up to my ear and just listen to the snap. And then the next stage, most people will go to put it in their mouth, which again is a natural thing to do, but to smell, especially with something like chocolate. And this works with anything aromatic, but different chocolates have between 400 to 600 different types of flavors that you could possibly smell.
Wow.
So it's really complex, even more complex than red wine. But you can do this with red wine, with cheese, with spirits, with anything really aromatic. This is lovely. And even even regular food, this is quite interesting to do, but it's smelling, because we have all these little nose hairs that will catch the aromas. So that's the first type of smell. And then putting a little bit into your mouth, and if it's chocolate, rather than chewing, letting it melt, so moving around your mouth. And there's a few different things that you can pay attention to. There's another form of touch, which is mouth feel, so how the chocolate feels in your mouth, whether it's creamy or grainy, or you might have little bits in it that you can taste. There's also another form of smell, which is your mouth smell, or orthonasal smell. So, retronasal smell. This is orthonasal smell, retronasal smell. So as that chocolate melts, all the aromas start to release, and as you breathe out, they get pushed up the back of your throat to your olfactory bulb. And then there's taste, what we taste on our tongue. So there's the 5 basic tastes, but taste scientists actually think there's many more than that. But so sweet, salty, bitter, sour, umami. So this is just, we've already taken a few minutes just on this piece of chocolate. So then leaving it to melt, slipping down your throat, and then just stopping. And again, our natural inclination is to go and rush to the next mouthful, but just pausing. So that's really the process. And even just doing this for one mouthful is a beautiful practice. You could sit there for 5 minutes. When I do my hot chocolate meditations, it's normally about 20, 25 minutes. And it's really amazing. Wow. People don't realize that it's been 25 minutes. I mean, it doesn't speed past, but actually just that sitting, sipping, really gently going through each of those mouthfuls. It's a really, really beautiful practice. So, you can do it in 1 minute, or you can do 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you prefer.
That's so amazing. I mean, just listening to you, even without the chocolate, you can actually kind of feel that mindfulness and that tendency to want to do that instead of, throwing another M&M in my mouth or, whatever. But it is that sense. And it also reminded me back when I was on dating apps, this one guy who was a yogi at the time, and this was 15, 20 years ago, my favorite food is blueberries. Mm-hmm. And he's like, so what is it about blueberries that you love? And I'm like, they're blueberries. If I had really done what you just described, even with that blueberry, it's blue. I don't necessarily think that it has a smell to it, but it does have that burst of flavor when you bite into it, right? Mm-hmm. And it does. So next time I eat some blueberries, I might just do that. But you can do it with a lot of different foods, but I like the chocolate pieces too. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it is really interesting to explore. And I think, if you're doing it technically as a mindfulness exercise, you're supposed to suspend your judgment, which doesn't mean that you can't say I like or I don't like it, because actually that's quite important. But the non-judgment is stepping back and saying, oh, I don't like this. That's okay. And I think one of the things I find with mindful eating, we can eat a lot of stuff out of habit, and sometimes not stopping and saying, oh, do I even like this? It's just I've always eaten this. Or actually, how's my body feeling? And then this is kind of coming back to the whole IBS thing is, if you're going really fast, you're not always noticing those signals from your body and saying, okay, I'm eating this carrot, I'm eating this salad, I'm eating it raw, I'm eating it cooked. How does it make me feel? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling uplifted? Actually, is it making me sluggish? Am I feeling a bit, I can't quite put a name on it. So again, there are little ways that you can start building this in whatever way works for you. And some people use it as a dietary tool, which is not my personal practice. And it's certainly not how I use it, but I can also understand because it can help you recognize your satiety levels. So sometimes we can eat, when you eat really quickly, you don't realize you're full. Whereas when you're eating much more slowly, and I find this really interesting. I used to run a lot of cooking classes, and we would eat at the end of it. And we would make some stuff in the class, and then we would eat in silence for 5 or 10 minutes. And people would be like, wow, I've had half of this and I'm already full. And even a lady, she said, I would normally have gobbled this down in 30 seconds. She said, I've had a third and it's enough. And so that's where it comes in. So as I say, I don't personally use it as a dietary tool, but I can understand why it's being used that way. Because again, it's just about that building your connection and understanding whether I'm full, how my body feels. Do I like this? Don't I like this?
Right.
Cool. Maybe I know, maybe I don't know. Let's try this again and just practice it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really kind of paying attention to the idiosyncrasies of food. And kind of what we've said is we just usually, I'm kind of like that lady, and I eat my food, gobble my food down really fast. And my friend Marie, she takes her time eating her food, and we sometimes make fun of her, but it's actually probably better for her than us finishing it really fast.
Well, yeah, I'm that person, unfortunately. I'm a painfully slow eater. I was always quite a slow eater, but the downside is that, yes, everyone else has finished their meals and you've still got half on your plate. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think I've found that it's also helped me realize that I can't eat too many different ingredients and too much food in one sitting. For me, that just is a bit too much for my digestion. For people that don't have digestive issues, it's not necessarily the same issue. But again, that was something I discovered through that practice. So yeah, I do eat really slowly. I'm that person.
and that's okay. But it is something to learn and understand. And when you were talking about that, it also made me remind me of food allergies and people who have, you're trying to say, hey, let's look at it. Do I really like this? Does this make me happy? Is it causing something in my digestive issues? A food allergic reaction is going to happen in a much different way than a digestive reaction is going to be. And it's not that kind of same thing, but it is just as important to understand that, because you could be stuck in your room for a couple of hours because your body can't digest that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are there any other things that you found in your practice in working with people, how mindfulness works and how chocolate helps them?
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting for me, because I do a lot of corporate work as well, obviously remotely at the moment, as with everybody else. But, in normal times, I do a lot of work where I go into businesses and I run sometimes just generic mindfulness sessions. But as much as possible with chocolate, I just try and bring it in as much as I possibly can. And I think for me, the most common thing I see for people is that they haven't even realized that they've been stressed and a bit out of whack, and that the shoveling the food down is all part of the whole stress situation. And it's really interesting because we're in a slightly different situation now that in some ways has become exacerbated, because before, at least, even when people were in offices, they had those little breaks without realizing them, your water cooler moments, or going and making a cup of tea, or having a coffee, or having a meeting, or going out for lunch. And actually, a lot of people now are working elongated days, even if they're not commuting. A lot of people, I've certainly found in the UK, and I don't know whether it's the same in the US, quite a few people are working even longer hours on screens, which again is this stimulant for us and can be one of the things that triggers a stress response, or what's called your sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight state. And so you're kind of constantly stimulated. So finding those little ways to switch off are even more important now. But I think the first stage, and this was absolutely me as well, is just the recognition. It's even feeling into that and stopping and saying, actually, I don't feel great, or I'm a bit stressed. And not all stress is bad, don't get me wrong. Some stress is actually really good for us and encourages us to do new things and learn and expand and all those sorts of things. It's just really the chronic stress that I'm talking about particularly. And so I think the first stage is always just saying, actually, I'm not feeling quite right. And the first step might be prioritizing sleep over meditation, because actually it probably generally should be as well. Like if you're not prioritizing sleep, everything else is going to be a bit of a mess, including your eating and everything else. And so then the next stage for me after that is, well, what's something else you can do for your well-being on a regular basis? And it might be meditation. It might be walking in nature or a park. It might be borrowing someone's pet. It might be listening to some really relaxing music. This is just one tool, and it's not the only thing that I do to look after myself. And I'm always really it's really important that I discuss that with other people when I'm running my sessions, is to say that, look, your whole solution is not going to come through meditation. It's a tool. Find 2 or 3 things that you can do on a regular basis that work really well for you. And it might be mindful eating. It might be playing with chocolate. I mean, if you love chocolate, it's a totally cool ingredient. I mean, it might be giving yourself a Saturday afternoon once a month to just play with chocolate in your kitchen. That all plays into it. So it's just, as I say, it's always finding your little toolkit of things, putting them in place when you're feeling okay, so that when you're feeling stressed, they can kick in a bit more, but also to optimize your well-being in just your regular times as well. It's not just about kind of dealing things when you're sick and unwell or you're having a reaction to something. Actually, this is something that just gives you a little top up with well-being in your regular times as well.
That's such a good point. And it reminded me too of my mom. Typically every Friday, she's like, all right, it's 5 o'clock. It's time for us to sit down and have a drink cocktail together and chat about the day. And I'm like, okay, whatever, Mom. But that is her way of also, that's kind of a mindfulness practice. Let's drop the day and talk about it and sit and have a and just talk,
Yeah. And being really present, it's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. And we've been trained over recent years to be less and less present. It was always pretty challenging anyway. But I think with now the way that we use screens and technology, certainly, in developed countries, that we have lost a lot of that ability for deep work and focus and presence. And so finding those ways to help you to be present is really, really important. So as I say, chocolate is one of the things that helps me. So I basically just try and include chocolate in my day as much as possible.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people that agree with you. Okay, so where can everyone find out more about you, where work with you, buy your chocolate for themselves and for guests or customers or friends?
Yes, you can find me in two places, hopefully. So my events are at foodatheart.co.uk, and you can also find me on Instagram. That's my main social media channel that I'm on. So that's where I do most of my meditation work and my events. And I do run, for anyone who's interested in doing regular meditation, I do run free 15-minute meditations. In the UK, it's 12:15 on a Monday, so that probably doesn't work so well, but 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, so this evening. They're open to anyone. You can find them both on the website, the link, a Zoom link, or I run them on Instagram Live, and they're open to anyone to drop into. So that's my meditation and events. And my product range, as you mentioned at the beginning, is called Calm Cocoa by Meredith Whiteley, and that is at calmcocoa.co.uk. And that's my hot chocolate range. So I have 5 different hot chocolates, and they all come with a little self-guided meditation card. And the whole idea is just to use it as a tool to slow down, take a breath, enjoy some chocolate, do it as a meditation, or just do it as a little bit of me time. Either of those is fine by me.
That's awesome. So, well, I just posted all of those links into the chat here, so everybody has them immediately. And so to end it off, besides chocolate, well, I was going to say, what's your favorite food? Do you have another one besides chocolate?
It's so hard to choose. I love food so much. It's actually really quite difficult to choose my favorite food. And it depends on the season as well. I'm really into soup at the moment because it's really cold over here. But, obviously chocolate is great. I mean, even though I'm working with chocolate, clearly I don't just eat chocolate because that would make me feel not very well. So, I mean, it sounds really strange. I really love vegetables. So vegetables, like I like roasting them, soups, salads. But one thing that is like probably my favorite thing, and I don't have very often, is really, really good chips. It's not that easy to find good chips. Sometimes really good chips are the best thing in the world. And I was traveling away the other day somewhere. It was the middle of the day. It was about 3 or 4 degrees, and we found a little English fish and chip shop, and we had some chips from the chippy, and I can't remember the last time I've had them, and oh my goodness, they were just delicious. So yeah, they're absolutely really good chips.
All right, well, that's good. And for all those in the US, that's French fries.
Yeah, French fries, but fatter French fries in between French fries and wedges.
Right, yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's just been absolutely lovely to speak to you.
Likewise, and there's so much to learn about chocolate. So I hope everybody goes and checks out Meredith's websites. They're listed in the chat here. I will list them at the bottom of the podcast as well. And of course, she's for hire. So have her about chocolate or buy some of her hot chocolate. Thanks, everybody, for being here at the Eating at a Meeting podcast. You can find us on all podcast platforms, as well as the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group. And until next time, thanks and have a great day. Oh, and eat chocolate.